you want to hear some scary stories? Once again, I've been looking through the archives for you, and here are 3 lesser known but still fascinating murders, both solved and unsolved, from Newcastle. The first one, well, inquests are just not what they used to be. Take the mysterious murder of Robert TURBITT. Now consider that the inquest to his murder was held the following day at the local pub, the Ord Arms. Not exactly what you'd expect. But to explain all this, we have to go back to 1893, Friday the 17th of March 1893, the day before the inquest. Robert lived at 39 Blackett Terrace, which was on the edge of Denton Burn in Scotswood. He was 42 years of age and a brickmaker at Benson's Brickworks in Scotswood. He was in good health and in good spirits when he went to bed the night before, and he lived with his 2 sons and his daughter. He left his house in the morning to proceed to Benton Brickworks between 5 and 10 minutes to 6. He didn't have any breakfast. That's because he was running a little bit late. So he was going to cut through the Dean if he was going to be on time. On his way, he passed his neighbour, Anne Rowell, who he spoke to, and said she was up early and that he was going to walk through the woods today. Now, he rarely went this way due to an injury, and the Dean wasn't the most even of routes. Anne said she saw no one else in the area at this time. James Green was the person that found Robert dead. He set off for work 15 minutes later and saw a man face down in the stream which ran through the Dean. He said he knew immediately that Robert was dead. He went to get the police and a group of men lifted Robert from the water. Now this is where things get mysterious. Robert was not just attacked, he was attacked, but he was also shot, not just once, 4 times. His arm was broken, his nose was almost cut off, and his skull was fractured. And no one heard a thing. A neighbour ran to his house to alert his son, and the body was initially taken back to the house, where another bullet was seen to fall from his body. Anne Rowell, the neighbour, who Robert spoken to on his way to the Dean, said that later, after his body was found, she saw a strange man who was carrying umbrellas. He gave her a strange look as she was talking to a neighbour. He was a big man wearing a blue pilot topcoat. He was not the man who usually came around and fixed their umbrellas. He was a strange man altogether, and he was very red in the face. And that's it. The pub-based inquest, heard the following day, found the events just as mysterious. No one who knew Robert had anything bad to say about him. None of the people he worked with said he had any problems with anybody. In fact, he seems to just have been a regular nice guy looking after his kids. But there is one thing which caught my attention reading through this inquest. The testimony of Robert's son is somewhat strange. He says that he got up at the same time as his dad, and he also got dressed for work. Watched his dad leave, but then he says he decided not to go to work and went back to bed instead. Now, as far as I can tell, his 2 younger siblings, who were children, slept through all this. So, then I guess everyone at the inquest finished their drinks, paid the landlord, and went home. Robert was buried on the Monday, and no one was ever arrested for this murder. It remains unsolved to this day. So, in summary, the guy gets killed in woods. Men take his body home, pop down the pub the next day, talk about it over a few drinks, decide that they're not going to figure out who's to blame, and bury him the following Monday. Now the next one, we've got to go even further back to 1834 on Elsick Lane, or as it's now known as, Elsick Road. Now, if we go down the hill from Elsick Road, towards the river, we find Walker, Parker & Co., proprietors of the Shot and White Lead Works at Elsick. Now, it was customary for them to give a dinner and other entertainment to the numerous people that they employed. Now, this took place on the Friday and went on till about 10 o'clock in the evening, at which time Thomas Martin, who was not employed by them, turned up to collect his wife, who was employed by them. And the walk back up to Elsick Road back in 1834 was through lots of quiet fields, so that's why he had gone to pick her up. Now, some words took place between them, and it seems to be about respecting the lateness of the hour, and that perhaps one of them was being a bit too loud. It's not said in the inquest which one of them this was, but what we do know is that he, Thomas Martin, struck his wife, and when he was in the process of trying to hit her again, another employee, James FAIRLEY, stepped in and stopped him. This caused Thomas's wife to panic and run off. It's said because she was worried that her expensive clothes that she had been wearing to the party would get damaged. She ran home to her lodgings and changed her clothes and then returned to the scene of the fight. It seems, however, in the interval, that one of these men had been killed. The man killed, James Fairley, who was the guy who tried to break up the fight, was lying dead in the lane, and he was badly injured. His face terribly lacerated, and his chest smashed in. His body was taken to the hospital by other people that had been at the party, but Martin was nowhere to be seen. It turned out that they actually knew each other. They were both from Ireland and had been friends for quite some time. At the inquest, under the direction of the coroner, a verdict of manslaughter was returned, and a warrant was immediately issued for the arrest of Thomas Martin. But he never was arrested, because he disappeared off the face of the earth after this event, and, once more, no one was ever charged with James's murder. It would seem that Thomas and his wife probably returned to Ireland. Now I've had a good look through the newspaper archives, and I can't find any evidence he was ever arrested for this, so it looks like he got away with it, and his wife probably stuck by his side. They didn't have things like Interpol back then, so I think you could probably just change your name, and that was that. If you weren't recognised, you'd get away with it, although presumably they could never show their faces in Newcastle ever again, so who knows what became of them. So, if any of you have done your family tree and have found a Thomas Martin who mysteriously changed his name back in 1834, you might have just solved a cold case. Okay, now the last one. Bear with me on this slightly. We're going to go back to August the 29th, 1874. Now this one was a widely reported story, but in all three articles that I have dug out of the archive, it is described in a similar way. Let me give you an example of a headline. Yesterday afternoon, a Jewess named Rebecca Lewis was accused of murder. Yes, they really do use that word, which was not a word I'd ever heard before, that I had to Google and look up, and the only other person I could find having said it in like the last 20 years was Jeremy Corbyn's crazy brother Piers Corbyn, and that incident didn't go down very well at all, as you might imagine. Anyhow, Rebecca Lewis, about 40 years of age, the wife of a slipper maker residing on Elsick Lane, which we now know is called Elsick Road, in Newcastle, and she suddenly attacked her husband while he was looking out of the window, stabbed him thrice in the neck before he could wrest the knife from her. He ran for surgical aid, and his wife ran next door and burst into the house of their neighbour, a woman called Raven, where she seized a table knife and then drew it across her very own throat. Miss Raven ran for the police, but on her return was horrified to find that both of her own children had been stabbed in the neck. One, a 3-year-old boy, lay on his back on the floor with his throat cut, and his infant 3-month-old brother lay beside him bleeding from the wound in the mouth, apparently caused by a knife being thrust down his throat. Now, neither of the wounds were severe enough for the children to die, but they were in a bad way. So, the police arrived, and after dressing Rebecca's wounds, she seemed to calm down a little bit, but then suddenly jumped up and attempted to stab herself with a fork. She was restrained and an officer was left in charge of her. At this point, they assumed that she was probably insane. Now, they did have a theory about what had driven her insane, but I'm not too sure about this. So, apparently before this event, she was arrested and sent to prison for stealing from one of her sons, and they think that this series of events drove her mad. Not sure that they would go down that line today. Anyhow, Rebecca was brought up to a private sitting of the Magistrates' Court, accused of the attempted murder of her husband and the attempted murder of both the children. The magistrates decided to commit her to a lunatic asylum, and shortly after this, the 3-month-old child did die of their wounds. Now, the only follow-up I can find for this in the archives is that it appears that Rebecca was committed to the local lunatic asylum, and her husband and the other child did recover from their wounds. So there you have it, 3 strange examples of justice in Newcastle from the 1800s. It does seem that justice was rather more flexible back then and took place a lot quicker. Now, I don't doubt that back then, especially locally, people probably knew exactly who committed these crimes and the reasons why they were committed, but it simply didn't reach the police, or the level of evidence was too low. Without things like DNA and video cameras, you had to go on people's testimonies, and if they weren't willing to go on record, you basically could get away with anything. I hope you enjoyed these 3 examples. There are quite a few more, and I'll probably make some follow-up videos looking at some crimes perhaps from the 1900s, where the police forces were a little bit more organised. But until then, don't have nightmares and do sleep well.